We'll be discussing about this RNA splicing in today's lecture, another maybe 30 minutes or so. This is the usual disclaimer that I, do it in every lecture, that it is meant for you. And some of the pictures in this presentation have been taken from public domain websites so that, you can understand the topic easily. And the credit for such pictures, such images remain with the original publisher. I have tried to acknowledge wherever possible uh, the source of those pictures. Now, what exactly is meant by RNA splicing? One thing that all of you must remember is that eukaryotic genes are split genes. Genes in eukaryotes are split genes. What is meant by split genes? That means in eukaryotes, the coding sequences, they are called as exons. Coding sequences, they are separated by non-coding sequences. And those non-coding sequences are called as introns. That is what is meant by split genes. That in eukaryotes, you don't have the coding gene is not just one complete part of the DNA. In fact, in a gene, the coding stretches are separated by non-coding stretches. Non-coding stretches are called as introns, and therefore we call these kinds of genes as split genes. I have tried to show it over here. So this is exon, this is the coding sequence, coding part of it, whereas it is separated by the next coding sequence. This is the next coding sequence, exon 2, by a non-coding region. That non-coding region is called as intron. A gene may have more than one intron also, depending upon the size of the gene. And you can have multiple exon, you can have multiple introns, and accordingly you can name them. Exon 1, exon 2, exon 3 like this, exon 4 like this. And similarly, introns can also be named intron 1, intron 2 like this. So you understand, exons are coding sequences, and two coding sequences means two exons are separated by a non-coding sequence intron. Right? So this is an example of a split eukaryotic gene where exons and introns both of them are present. Now, in the course of lecture, what we will be doing, this exon on this side, they are called as upstream exons, and exons on this side, they will also be called as downstream exons. Okay, so we have understood in an earlier lecture what is meant by an upstream thing and what is meant by a downstream thing. So exon on this side, as shown by the arrow, they are also referred to as upstream exons, and exons on this side, they will also be referred to as downstream exons. Now, what are introns? Let us understand that thing first. So introns, now you know these are the non-coding sequences. They don't code for protein. What is their importance? What is their significance? Why are they there? We right now don't have any answer for that, but they are there. Their size varies from a small intron like 50 nucleotides to 10,000 nucleotides. The size of intron means non-coding sequence. A given intron can vary anywhere between 50 to 10,000 nucleotides. And irrespective of their size, whether it is of 50 nucleotides or 10,000 nucleotides, irrespective of the size of the intron and their numbers. As I said, some genes may have 2 introns, some may have 5 introns, some may have 7 introns like that, and their size may also vary. So irrespective of their size and numbers, they are precisely cleaved from the RNA transcript. They are represented in the RNA. When the DNA is transcribed, they are represented in the RNA, they are there in the RNA non-coding sequences, but before that RNA is translated, these non-coding sequences, they are precisely cleaved to generate the mature messenger RNA. They are not part of the mature messenger RNA. Mature messenger RNAs will have only exon joined head to tail, one after the other, without any intervening sequences. So that messenger RNA is called as mature messenger RNA. Otherwise, till that time, that RNA is referred to as RNA transcript. So before it is undertaken for translation, the transcript, it will be the introns, the non-coding sequences will be removed from the transcript, and irrespective of their size and numbers, they are precisely cleaved to generate the mature messenger RNA. Even a one nucleotide shift in the removal. Okay, so this is, let's say, this is exon 1, this is intron, and this is exon 2. So what is needed is that this should be precisely cleaved like this. Not even a nucleotide shift, means one nucleotide from on this side, same number of nucleotide, but there is a shift of one nucleotide on this side. You are removing the same number of nucleotide, but there is a shift of one nucleotide towards my right, or there can be a shift towards my left also, like this. There can be shift like this. So if such a thing happens, if there is a shift of one nucleotide in, an intron is removed like that, it is going to lead to change in reading frame. You now know what is meant by reading frame. It will result in what is called as frame shift mutation. The entire reading frame is going to change. Just a one nucleotide shift in removing, in excising those intron, can lead to very dire consequences. The entire reading frame is going to change, and the meaning of that particular protein, its biological function will also change. Okay, so you understand what is the importance. Every time, whatever may be the number and whatever may be the size of intron, they are very precisely cleaved. They are very precisely cleaved. If this is the intron, only that is going to be cleaved. This, not one nucleotide on this side, not one nucleotide on this side. Okay, the process by which these introns are so precisely removed is called as RNA splicing. This is the bookish definition of RNA splicing. Process by which introns are precisely removed is called as RNA splicing. Okay, so now you understand what is meant by RNA splicing. Now, irrespective of its size, these introns intron sequences are, irrespective of their size, if it is so precisely removed, there must be something so that every time splicing is undertaken, only the intron portion, not one nucleotide on left and not one nucleotide on right, is removed. So there has to be some mechanism, and that mechanism is that irrespective of the size, the intron sequences always invariably begins with GU. See, nature has provided a very ingenious way. So irrespective of the size, whether it is a 50 nucleotide intron or whether it is a 10,000 nucleotide intron, it will begin with GU, and it will always end with an AG, nucleotide AG. The first two nucleotides of an intron, irrespective of its size, are going to be G and U, and the last two nucleotides are always going to be A and G. In fact, there are consensus sequences. There are consensus sequences at both the places, at the 5' splice junction and 3' splice junction. At these two junctions, you have sequences which are identical in all the exon intron junctions. What people have done, people have screened so many exon intron junctions. These are the exon intron junctions. This is an exon intron junction. So this is exon 1, or what I said is an upstream exon. This is downstream exon, right? This is the 5' end of exon, so therefore this is going to be the 3' end of exon. This is going to be the 5' end of intron. So this is called as 5' splice junction. This junction is called as 5' splice junction. And this is the 3' end of intron. This is called as 3' splice junction. Okay, you must very specifically remember what is meant by 5' splice junction and what is meant by 3' splice junction. This is upstream exon, this is downstream exon. We are taking a simplified case wherein in a split gene you have only one intron and you have two exons, right? So let us see how this intron is very precisely spliced, is very precisely removed from this split gene from the RNA transcripts to generate a mature messenger RNA. So please remember what is meant by 5' splice junction and what is meant by a 3' splice junction. Okay, so at the 5' splice junction, you have this consensus sequence. I have mentioned it here also. Please remember the one in what you can say pink is intron. This is intron shown here. And it always begins with GU. It always begins with GU and it always ends with AG, irrespective of the size, whatever may be the size, whatever may be the number of nucleotides here in between, but it is always, it will begin with GU and it will end with these two nucleotides AG. And 5' splice site, you know, it has a consensus sequence. What is that consensus sequence? It is mentioned in this table also. AGGU, AAGU. This is the consensus sequence at the 5' splicing. All intron, you know, all 5' junctions, 5' splice sites, they will have this particular consensus sequence. So you must memorize this also. This particular table also, you have to write in big letters and put it in a room so that you can remember. Similar to the way we have remembered -10, -35 consensus sequences. Here also you must remember what is the consensus sequence at the 5' splice junction. This is the consensus sequence. Similarly, at the 3' splice junction, you have this consensus sequence. The intron ends with AG, but the consensus sequence, you know, gets into the downstream exon also. So what is the consensus sequence? Sequence is pyrimidine repeated n times, typically about 10 times. N means n is equal to 10 here, followed by N means N in nucleotide, C, A, and G. Actually, there should be one more G here. This is the consensus sequence. AG are the two last nucleotides of the intron and this G is of the downstream exon. Okay. So this is the consensus sequence at the 3' splice junction. In addition to these two consensus sequences, all introns will have a branch site. This is what is called as branch site. Typically, it is located about 50 nucleotide upstream. Nucleotides upstream from the 3' splice junction. About 50 nucleotides away from the 3' splice junction, this branch site is located. And in humans, you know, the branch site consensus sequences may be more than one. You know, in fact, you cannot say that it is a consensus sequence. You have more than one type of sequence found at the branch site. But in case of yeast, this is almost a consensus sequence. You have only this particular sequence located about 50 nucleotides upstream the 3' splice junction. 50 न्यूक्लियोटाइड 3' स्प्लाइस जंक्शन से अपस्ट्रीम यीस्ट के अंदर यही सीक्वेंस होती है. इन यीस्ट इट इज कॉल्ड एज अ कंसेंसस सीक्वेंस UAC UAAC. In case of mammals, in humans particularly, we do have branch site sequence, but it is not consensus. What is meant by this? That you don't have the same sequence repeated in all the introns. Rather, you have different types of sequences occurring about 50 nucleotide upstream the 3' splice junction in case of human beings. So therefore, we will not be using the word consensus sequence. But in case of yeast, it is this sequence only that is repeated, this sequence only which is present, and therefore we can call it as a consensus sequence. So you must remember these three consensus sequences. You must remember what is present at the 5' splice junction, what is present at the 3' splice junction, and what is present at the branch site. This particular diagram you must remember very clearly. Okay, now let us see, let us have an overview of how this happens. So this is upstream exon, exon 1. This is downstream exon, this is exon 2. And in between what you see is from here to here, this is intron, right? So you have, this is what is called as 5' splice junction. This is what is called as 3' splice junction, right? And this is in yellow, it is the branch site. In yeast, the sequence is almost same. Therefore, we call it as a consensus sequence. So you have this number 2 nucleotide is an A, and it is bonded to the first nucleotide here and the proceeding nucleotide here by the phosphodiester bond. This is the 3,5 phosphodiester bond. This is the 5,3 phosphodiester bond. But it has this 2 hydroxyl group free. This 2 hydroxyl group of A of the branch site attacks the 5' splice junction. It attacks that particular phosphodiester bond at the 5' splice junction. Okay. It forms a 5,2 phosphodiester bond with the first nucleotide of the intron at the 5' end. This is the first nucleotide G. You know, it is forming a phosphodiester bond with G, this A. And what is the direction of the phosphodiester bond? 5' to 2'. Because its 3' end is also engaged, its 5' end is also engaged in phosphodiester bond formation with the preceding, what you can say, nucleotide here and a proceeding nucleotide here. Since 3 and 5 carbons are engaged, it's carbon number 2, hydroxyl group at carbon number 2, it forms a 5,2 phosphodiester bond. And what do you have? You have this exon 1, upstream exon, freed, liberated. The newly generated hydroxyl group, 3' hydroxyl group in the upstream exon, then attacks the 3' splice junction. The newly generated hydroxyl group, 3' hydroxyl group of the upstream exon, this is the upstream exon. And once this phosphodiester bond is cleaved, since this is the 5' end, this is going to be the 3' end, it will have 3 hydroxyl group free. This newly generated 3' hydroxyl group then attacks the 3' splice junction. This is the 3' splice junction. It attacks the phosphodiester bond over here. The 2 exons are joined, shown here. These 2 exons are joined. Head to tail joining of the 2 exons. This is in the blue, the one in blue is a upstream exon or exon 1, and the one in green is the downstream exon or exon 2, and both of them are now joined. And this intron, it has been, this is the intron. This is the 3' end of the intron, and this is the 5' end of the intron. The intron is freed. It is, since it is, you know, it is bonded here, therefore we call it a Larient form of intron. This Larient form of intron is freed. So that is how intron is precisely removed by two successive trans-esterification reactions. This is reaction number 1, trans-esterification reaction. Attack of 2 OH at the 5' splice junction. And then the second is this is the second trans-esterification reaction. Attack of 3 hydroxyl group, newly generated 3 hydroxyl group of the upstream exon at the 3' splice junction. This is the 3' splice junction. In these 2 trans-esterification reaction, the 2 exons are joined head to tail, shown here, and the intron is freed. This is the intron that is getting freed precisely. Irrespective of the size, whatever may be the size, as long as the consensus sequences are intact, and the introns will be very precisely removed from the 2 exons, from between the 2 exons. If there are aberrations, if there are substitutions, if there are mutations in these consensus sequences, either at the 5' splice site or at the 3' splice junction, then removal of intron or splicing may not take place properly. That shows the importance, that shows the significance of these consensus sequences in the process of splicing. I am repeating once again, irrespective of the size, as long as you have these consensus sequences intact, the 5' splice junction consensus sequence, the 3' splice junction consensus sequence, and the branch site. As long as these sequences remain intact, whatever may be the size of the intron will be very precisely removed from between the two exons. But if there are substitutions, if there are mutations, if there are aberrations in these consensus sequences, then the splicing will be affected. Then removal of intron is not going to be as precise as it happens in this case. So you must remember that this goes on to show the significance, the critical role of these consensus sequences in the process of RNA splicing. Now, the question that comes is, what provides the surface for this splicing? Okay, so what was found out is that the splicing is sponsored by spliceosomes. Splicing is sponsored by spliceosomes. What are the spliceosomes? Spliceosomes are ribonucleoprotein. I'm introducing this word ribonucleoprotein. What is meant by ribonucleoprotein? Means something which is made up of both RNA, typically less than 300 nucleotide, small nuclear RNAs, snRNAs, or small cytoplasmic RNAs. Okay, RNA typically less than 300 nucleotide plus protein. When you have RNA and protein, you call it as ribonucleoprotein particle. So spliceosomes are nothing but ribonucleoprotein particles. So they provide the surface and they catalyze the splicing. Surface is provided by these ribonucleoproteins and they also catalyze the splicing. Okay. Components of a typical spliceosomes are shown in this particular table here. So I'll just read it out. SN means small nuclear. Now you know ribonucleoprotein particle, the name is U1. RNP means ribonucleoprotein. U1. It is made up of 165 nucleotide long RNA and some protein. And what is its role? It binds to 5' splice junction followed by 3' splice site. What is its role? It binds to 5' splice junction first, followed by its binding to 3' splice junction. Okay. The second component of a typical spliceosome is the RNP U2. It is made up of 185 nucleotide long RNA. And some protein is also there, which is not specified in this table. What is its role? It binds the branch site. It binds the branch site. And it also forms, it is also a part of the catalytic center. The third RNP of the spliceosome is U5. It is 116 nucleotide long RNA. Some protein is there. And what is its job? Its role is to bind to the 5' splice site. The next one is U4. RNA is 145 nucleotide long. What does it do? Its role is to mask the catalytic activity of U6. Catalytic activity is primarily located, residing on RNP U6. So till the time all the arrangements are made, till the time these RNPs are properly aligned, the catalytic activity is masked by this U4. Catalytic activity located, residing on U6 is masked, is covered by U4. U6 is the next RNP, 106 nucleotide long, and it has got the active site. The main active site is located here. It is assisted by U2 also. We said somewhere here that it is also a part of the catalytic center, but the main catalytic center is located on U6. So these are the 5 components of a typical spliceosome. They are RNPs, ribonucleoprotein particles comprising RNA typically less than 300 nucleotide. If it is in the nucleus, they are called as snRNA, small nuclear. If it is in the cytoplasm, they are called as small cytoplasmic RNA, SC. Right? Plus some protein is there. Okay, now what do you think that this U1 will very specifically go and bind to 5' splice site and then followed by 3' splice site? The answer is very simple. Since it has got an RNA, it has got a sequence which is complementary to the sequence which is present at the 5' splice junction. It has got a sequence which is complementary to the sequence which is present at the 3' splice junction. So please remember, I keep telling that in biological system, when it comes to interaction between or among the biomolecules, interaction between the biomolecules of the same class is always easy. Means interaction of carbohydrate to carbohydrate, it is easy. Protein to protein is easy. Nucleotide to nucleotide is easy, very easy. Like, by complementarity, they can always join. But when it comes to interaction between the two different biomolecules, means when you talk of interaction between protein and nucleotide, it is difficult. When you talk of interaction between carbohydrate and protein, it is difficult. Okay. So how does it recognize specifically, how does it go and specifically bind to 5' splice junction? The answer is very simple, that it has got a sequence which is complementary to the consensus sequence which is present at the 5' splice junction. It has got a sequence which is complementary to the consensus sequence which is present at the 3' splice junction. U2, it goes and bind to the branch side. How does it do it? Again, the answer is simple, that U2 has got, this RNA has got a sequence which is complementary to the consensus sequence present at the branch site. Okay. All right. So this is in detail now. We'll see whatever we know about this mechanism. So now I tried to show you over here that this U1, it has got an RNA and it has got a sequence which is complementary to the sequence, consensus sequence present at the 5' splice junction. The one that I have been telling you, I was telling you in the previous slide, I've tried to show it over here. Okay. So it begins with, the splicing begins with binding of U1 to the 5' splice site. How does it bind? Now you know the answer. This is the 5' splice junction. This U1 comes and binds over here. So U1 is bound here. How does it bind? Very simple answer is that it has got a sequence which is complementary to the sequence, consensus sequence present at the 5' splice junction. U2 comes and binds to the branch site. U2 also joins and it comes and binds to the branch. This is branch site. So U2 comes and bind over here. How does it bind? Again, by complementarity, this RNA of U2, snRNA of U2 has got a stretch, has got a region which is similar, which is complementary, not similar, complementary to the sequence which is present at the branch site. Then, because of the binding of these two, the 5' splice junction, this is the 5' splice junction and this is the 3' splice junction, they are brought together. It allows intron to fold in such a way that the two junctions, they come in close vicinity to each other. This is 5' and this is 3'. Both these junctions come in close vicinity to each other after the binding of U1 and U2. And as a result of that, U1 can now extend pairing with the 3' splice junction also. How does it do it? Again, the same thing, that the U1 RNA, snRNA of RNP U1 has got a sequence which is complementary to the sequence present at the 3' splice junction. So because of the looping of the intron in such a manner, these two splice sites come in close vicinity to each other, and now U1 can extend its pairing at the 3' splice junction also. After this, the next step is a pre-assembled complex of U4, U6 and U5, then join the complex. A pre-assembled complex of U4, U5 and U6, then join this. So this is U4, this is U5 and this is U6. In the first step, these three will come together and then in a group, they will join this complex. Now U5 interacts with the 5' splice site. At this, what happens before this? ATP driven melting of base pairing takes place between U1 and the 5' splice site. ATP driven melting. So we know now U1 is paired to the 5' splice junction, but using ATP, energy derived from ATP hydrolysis, this base pairing is going to be disrupted. U1 will be leaving the complex and now instead U5 will extend pairing with the 5' splice junction. Again, how does U5 pairs with the 5' splice junction? The answer is same again, because U5 has got a sequence, RNA has got a sequence which is complementary to the consensus sequence which is present at the 5' splice junction. So till now it was occupied by U1, but now U1 leaves the complex and U5 extends its pairing at the 5' splice junction. At this time, the catalytic center which is located on U6, it is unmasked. So I told you in earlier slide that the catalytic center of U6 it is masked by U4. So U4 now unmasks the catalytic center. It was waiting for what? It was waiting that U5 pairs with the 5' splice junction. So when everything is aligned properly, the catalytic center is unmasked. U6, where you have the catalytic center, pairs with the 5' splice side. How does that pairing takes place? Standard answer is by complementarity, followed by its interaction with U2. Where is U2 located? U2 is present at the branch side. And I told you that U2 is also a part of the catalytic center. So now U6 and U5, U6 and U2, now they are properly aligned. The catalytic center is exposed. It is no longer masked. It is aligned with U2 also, which is also a part of the catalytic activity. U2 is located at the branch side. Now U2 and U6 probably bring about the catalysis. They bring about the catalysis. Means what is the catalysis? That the 2-hydroxyl group of the U2 the 2-hydroxyl group of the branch side where U2 is aligned, it attacks the 5' splice junction here. Okay, but who is sponsoring now? This is being sponsored by the RNP U2 or RNP U6. Okay, this bond is going to be hydrolyzed. A 3-hydroxyl group will be generated here. Now that 3-hydroxyl group in the second step will attack the 3' splice junction. This particular bond, the 2 exons will be joined and this intron will be liberated. Okay, so why do you need spliceosome? The answer is that, for example, this particular exon, once that bond has been hydrolyzed, will it be freely suspended like this? No. There has to be some place where it remains anchored to. There has to be some place, where it will remain bound to. So that place is the spliceosome. Spliceosome provides the surface for this catalysis reaction to take place. So that is how this intron is going to be removed. We have seen the mechanism earlier, but what is the role of these RNPs? I have tried to show it to you here in this particular diagram. That is how this splicing takes place in case of eukaryotic messenger RNAs. So this is all we have for this today. Tomorrow we'll understand what is